August 14th, 1942. Kaiser Shipyard No. 2, Richmond, California. The welding supervisor checked his clipboard twice before believing what he was reading. Hull No. 537, a 10,000-ton Liberty ship designated SS George Washington Carver, had just been assembled in 72 days by a workforce that 6 months earlier didn't know a rivet gun from a typewriter. 42% of the welders were women. Another 18% were Black Americans who'd been sharecroppers or domestic workers the previous year. The foreman, a gruff veteran of Detroit's auto plants, had predicted disaster when he first saw the crew assignments. Now he stood silent, watching steam billow from the hull as it prepared for launch, understanding he was witnessing something that would reshape not just the war, but the entire American economy forever. What the Axis powers failed to grasp, what their intelligence analysts dismissed as impossible propaganda, was that America's greatest weapon wasn't sitting in a factory or flying over Europe. It was standing on assembly lines in pants and coveralls, wielding tools that conventional wisdom said they had no business holding. While German factories relied on slave labor that sabotaged production, and Japanese industry operated with a workforce decimated by military conscription, the United States unlocked a reservoir of human potential so vast it would not only win the war, but redefine the 20th century. The numbers tell a story that seemed like fiction to Axis planners. In 1940, the United States industrial workforce numbered 32 million. By 1945, it had swelled to 41 million, even as 12 million men were pulled into military service. The arithmetic alone should have been impossible. America had simultaneously shrunk its traditional labor pool while expanding total industrial production by 200%. The answer to this mathematical paradox walked through factory gates every morning in Richmond, Detroit, Seattle, and 1,000 other cities across the nation. Women didn't trickle into defense work. They flooded it. At the peak of production, 6.5 million women were building the weapons that would defeat fascism. They weren't filing papers or answering phones. They were operating drill presses that required precision measured in thousandths of an inch. They were climbing into the fuselages of B-24 bombers to install electrical systems. They were welding hull plates on destroyers with techniques that would have taken male workers months to master. And these women were doing it in weeks. Rose Will Monroe became the face of this transformation. At the Ford Willow Run plant in Ypsilanti, Michigan, she drove rivets into bomber fuselages on the night shift while raising 2 daughters alone after her husband died. When Hollywood came looking for someone to embody Rosie the Riveter in war bond films, they found the real thing. Monroe wasn't an actress playing a part. She was a 30-year-old widow from Kentucky who'd never held a factory job until December 7th. 1941 changed everything. Her hands built the planes that bombed Berlin. At the Bethpage, New York plant, where Grumman built Hellcat fighters, women comprised 38% of the workforce by 1943. These weren't simple assembly jobs. Women were operating complicated hydraulic presses, reading technical blueprints with hundreds of specifications, and maintaining quality control standards that meant the difference between a pilot living or dying at 30,000 feet over the Pacific. The rejection rate for parts produced by female workers was actually lower than the pre-war rate when the workforce had been entirely male. Precision, it turned out, had nothing to do with gender and everything to do with training and motivation. The transformation of African American workers represented an even more profound shift. In 1940, most Black Americans in industrial cities were locked out of manufacturing jobs entirely. Defense contractors wouldn't hire them. Unions wouldn't admit them. The color line in American industry was as rigid as any fortification the Wehrmacht ever built. Then the scale of war production created a labor shortage so severe that prejudice became a luxury the nation literally couldn't afford. President Roosevelt's Executive Order 8802, signed in June 1941 under pressure from A. Philip Randolph's threatened march on Washington, opened the gates. The Fair Employment Practice Committee, weak as it was, established the principle that defense contracts came with obligations. Contractors who wanted government money would hire without regard to race. The results were staggering. Black employment in manufacturing tripled between 1940 and 1945. In Detroit alone, the black workforce in defense plants grew from 3,000 to 200,000. Men who'd been pulling crops in Alabama were now building tanks. Women who'd been domestic workers in Chicago were now assembling artillery shells. The Great Migration, already underway, became a torrent as African Americans fled Southern poverty for Northern factory jobs that paid 75 cents an hour, more money than most had seen in their entire lives. The African Americans who'd tasted industrial wages and skilled work didn't forget. The WWII campaign, victory over fascism abroad and victory over racism at home, didn't end in 1945. It accelerated. The men who'd served in segregated units came home refusing to accept second-class citizenship. The workers who'd built tanks in Detroit expected to buy houses in decent neighborhoods and send their children to good schools. When those doors stayed closed, they organized. The civil rights movement didn't spring from nowhere in the 1950s. It grew directly from the wartime transformation of black economic power and political consciousness. Japan and Germany, rebuilt as Cold War allies, became markets for American goods and models for American-style capitalism. But they were also competitors who'd learned from American production methods. The women who'd worked at Willow Run inspired Japanese factories to hire female workers. The integration of black workers in American defense plants became an argument, however hypocritical, that American democracy was superior to Soviet authoritarianism. The hidden workforce wasn't hidden because it was secret. It was hidden because conventional wisdom couldn't see it. Military planners, corporate executives, union leaders, all assumed that women couldn't do heavy industrial work, that black workers couldn't master skilled trades, that American agriculture couldn't possibly feed the world while losing millions of farmers to factories and foxholes. Period in American history. The GI Bill, the interstate highway system, the space program, the expansion of higher education, all of it rested on the foundation laid by the hidden workforce of World War II. The question it leaves behind is worth asking now. When the next existential challenge arrives, will we recognize the untapped potential standing in front of us? Or will we wait until crisis forces us to see what should have been obvious all along?